Most Americans are familiar with the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. The event would spur the United States into taking action against Imperial Japan and the Third Reich, making them a major player in the events of the Second World War. But Pearl Harbor was not the first planned attack on the United States, nor would it be the only attempt to bring the war to American soil, because Hitler had plans for his secret agents to strike at the heart of the land of the free. Or at least they would have if the whole plan hadn't ended up becoming a deranged, farcical mess. On June 13, 1942, in what was known as Operation Pastorius, 8 German nationals invaded the United States of America. Their orders were to sabotage the United States war effort by planting explosives in factories, canals, and various railways and bridges. All of them were caught by June 27th and faced a military tribunal. They would be betrayed by one of their own. These men were George Dasch, Ernst Peter Berger, Heinrich Harm Heink, Richard Kirin, John Carling, Werner Thiel, Hermann Neubauer, and Herbert Hans Haupt. The United States had remained neutral in the war until Pearl Harbor, after which the U.S. declared war against Japan on December 8, 1941. On the 11th, Germany and Italy had in turn declared war on the United States. In the early months of World War II, the United States contributed the industrial production, equipment, and supplies to help the Allies defend themselves against the Nazis. As a result, it's believed Hitler had given the order to mount a serious effort to reduce American production. German intelligence would turn to sabotage. Lieutenant Walter Kappa would be in charge of the project. He had spent many years in the United States before the war. He was active in the German-American Bund, an anti-Semitic and anti-communist organization of ethnic Germans living in the United States who was sympathetic to the Nazi cause. It's unknown how many people had joined, but it's believed there were at least 25,000 members. Kappa was also involved in other efforts in the United States to propagandize and gain support for Nazism. He was considered the #1 Nazi in the United States. In early 1942, Kappa would contact the saboteurs meant to take on the mission to the United States. They were mostly taken from civilian jobs, save for 2 who were members of the German army, but all of them willingly consented to the task. There were 12 trainees, and they only learned about their specific mission after they entered a sabotage school established near Berlin. They were taught chemistry and about incendiaries, explosives, timing devices, secret writing, and how to conceal their identities by blending in. Officials took the trainees to aluminum and magnesium plants, railroad shops, canals, locks, and other facilities that would help them familiarize themselves with their targets. The saboteurs had to memorize all the instructions and prepare for the decisive moment. On May 26, 1942, their plan was put into action. 4 of the saboteurs left by submarine from a German base in Lorient, France, and then, on May 28, the second group of 4 saboteurs left that same base. They'd been given different destinations on the Atlantic coast. They would all be wearing full or partial German uniforms when they landed. This was to ensure the United States would treat them as prisoners of war instead of spies if they were caught on arrival. Edward John Carling was born in Biebrich, Wiesbaden in 1909 and joined the Nazi Party in 1928. In the summer of 1940, Carling worked for the Wehrmacht, which was the name of the Unified Armed Forces of Nazi Germany, translating English broadcasts. He would later take a position with the Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. It was his job to manage German theaters. Carling would work in the propaganda ministry for 2 years before Kappa approached him with the opportunity to return to the United States. He accepted the mission and spent weeks training to become a saboteur. Before he was recruited to be a spy, George Dasch had a cushy job in Nazi Germany. He was paid well and he received extra food and cigarette rations. His job also meant he didn't have to worry about being drafted into the military. He was an Erfasser, or radio monitor. It was his job to listen to and translate American radio newscasts. When Dasch returned to Germany, however, he struggled to remember how to speak his native language of German. He had become too accustomed to English. When he had first started working as a radio monitor, he feared the fact that he'd forgotten so much German it would get him fired. However, after 3 weeks on the job, he was surprised when he was required to take the final oath of secrecy. It was a sign that his job was secure. Now, despite all this, Dasch wasn't happy. He wanted to do something more with his life. He had left his American wife in order to return to Nazi Germany to contribute to the war effort. When he left, his wife, Rosemarie Giel, had been in the hospital, recovering from surgery. The plan had been for her to follow him after she recovered. In America, he had worked as a waiter, a job that had not been intellectually stimulating. He also felt the American tipping system was degrading. As far as Dasch was concerned, the job was beneath him. When his mother discovered he was a waiter, she voiced her disappointment to him. Speaking to his insecurities about his job, she praised Hitler and Nazi Germany, convincing him to return to his home country to fight for Hitler. Dasch was almost denied entry into Germany, though. He was considered politically unreliable since he wasn't a Nazi, nor was he a member of the German-American Bund. Dasch falsified his political records in order to return to his home country, and he neglected to tell them he was a waiter. He lied, telling him that he'd been a salesman for an importer and exporter of goods. As part of that lie, he led them to believe that the job had actually benefited Nazi Germany. Fortunately for Dasch, the Nazi officials didn't bother to check if it was true, so after several months he was allowed to return to Germany. By the time he made it back to Germany, his mother had changed her tune. She didn't believe he should have returned. Dasch realized that in order to get a good job, he'd have to know someone in the Nazi Party. That was when he remembered his wife's cousin and her husband, Reinhold Barth. After Dasch convinced Barth that he was determined to help Germany win the war, Barth put him in contact with Walter Kappa. Struggling to communicate with Kappa in German, Dasch told him in perfect English that he wanted to join the German army. Kappa rejected this, telling Dasch that he was too used to having the freedom he experienced in the US to be a member of the army. Kappa offered Dasch two choices: work for the German Foreign Office or some other endeavor. Dasch felt that some other endeavor was too vague, so he decided to work for the Foreign Office. Because he spoke perfect English, Dasch was assigned the role of radio monitor. When he agreed to take the job, Kappa made a single phone call, and suddenly Dasch had the job. What Dasch didn't know at the time was that the other endeavor had been Operation Pastorius, which Kappa still considered him for. It wouldn't be until after Dasch had completed an oath of secrecy that Kappa began to reveal more information. Kappa offered Dasch the chance to return to America, but it would be to help Nazi Germany attack American industries through industrial sabotage. When he asked Dasch if he'd be willing to put together his ideas on sabotaging American industry by writing them down in English, Dasch agreed. He would return home to write down his ideas, which included how easy it would be to destroy American industries with high explosives. Dasch mapped out how a saboteur should behave in America to avoid being caught, blend in, and not draw attention. Desperate to prove his worth to Kappa, Dasch wrote down every idea he had. It took 1 week before he returned to Kappa's office to hand-deliver a 5-page memorandum. Dasch would be brought back into Kappa's office after Pearl Harbor. Now that the United States had officially entered the war, Hitler wanted to put Kappa's plan into action. Dasch would be trusted to help lay the groundwork and recruit more men for the project. Dasch was about to get what he wanted. He would become a very important person as the leader of a team of Nazi saboteurs. If the mission succeeded, he was promised a powerful position in the German government. George Dasch led a group of 4 saboteurs that landed on a beach near Amagansett, Long Island, New York. They arrived at 12:10 a.m. on June 13, 1942. He was joined by Ernst Peter Berger, Heinrich Heim Henk, and Richard Karen. Meanwhile, the second group would land at Ponte Verde Beach, Florida, south of Jacksonville, on June 17, 1942. This group was led by John Kerling, with Werner Thiel, Hermann Neubauer, and Herbert Hans Haupt. They had landed unobserved. After landing, they quickly discarded their uniforms and donned civilian clothing. They dispersed, making their way to Jacksonville, then to Cincinnati. 2 would then go to Chicago, while the other 2 departed for New York City. Dasch's group would not have the same success. Kieran disliked and distrusted Dasch to the point that he wanted to kill him. Kieran and Henk, friends and former co-workers at Volkswagen, created an alliance that deliberately excluded Dasch and Berger. As the mission went on, the tensions and distrust grew worse. Kieran also feared that Henk might talk if he was arrested or drunk. Things went from bad to worse for the men when they landed at their destination. It was a foggy night, so they had no idea that John Cullen, the Coast Guardsman, was walking right toward them. Cullen was unarmed and suspicious of the men, especially when they offered him a bribe to forget he had seen them. Cullen accepted the bribe to gain the men's trust, but he would immediately report his findings to headquarters. Sadly, by the time the search patrol arrived, the saboteurs had reached the railroad station. They were already on their way to New York City. Once they made it to Manhattan, they would check into a hotel and wait to set the plan in motion. What Dasch didn't realize was that he'd accidentally left his notebook on the beach. It was filled with names and addresses of people who could easily identify him. In fact, they left behind a lot of things in their rush to escape. A bottle of German schnapps, a German army cap with a swastika, a brown gabardine vest, an overcoat, a shovel, and a torn identification card. They left a trail right to the buried boxes they left behind, boxes full of sabotage equipment. The search patrol was able to find concealed explosives, timers, blasting caps, incendiary devices, cigarettes, and the saboteurs' naval uniforms. They immediately alerted the FBI, who conducted a massive manhunt, but they didn't know where the Germans were going. All of this was kept secret from the American public to avoid causing panic. Both teams were to wait until everyone was settled before getting to work. They would blend in for a few months in the United States until it was time. Kieran and Henk's distrust of Dasch continued to grow due to the fact that Dasch had failed to overpower Cullen. When they were instructed to check into Hotel Chesterfield, Kieran and Henk decided to go to the Martinique. a deluxe hotel on 49th Street, under their aliases. They didn't want Dash to be able to find them. Meanwhile, the FBI continued to examine the boxes they had left behind. Eugene Connolly, the assistant FBI director, considered it the most impressive sabotage equipment he had ever seen. Things for the group would shift dramatically when Dash and Berger had dinner together, enjoying a meal at one of the Hotel Governor Clinton's 3 restaurants, the Coral Room. As they ate together, they lamented over family hardships in Germany and difficulties with the Gestapo. The following morning, on June 14th, Dash would invite Berger over to his room after ordering room service. After an uneventful breakfast, Dash pushed the cart out of the room and threw the room key into the bathtub. He walked to the window and opened it. It was a 13-story drop to the ground below. Dash then told Berger, "We're gonna have a talk, and if we don't agree with each other, only one of us will leave this room alive." We'll never know everything that these men talked about, but we do know that Dash confessed that he had planned to turn himself into the FBI. Dash wanted to be a hero, but his loyalty between Germany and the United States had been divided. He felt that if he turned himself into the FBI, he would be considered a hero to America for stopping Hitler's secret attack on the US. He saw himself as another William Siebold, a United States citizen who had been coerced into becoming a German spy. Siebold would become a double agent who helped destroy Hitler's spy ring in America. Dash intended to help the United States beat the Nazis, and he claims that he had always planned to turn himself in. Dash stated that he had regretted ever returning to Nazi Germany, realizing it was a mistake early on. Berger agreed, revealing that he was the one who accidentally left a trail to the boxes of their sabotage equipment. He was sure the FBI had already seized it. Though they agreed to call the FBI, Dash and Berger feared Kieran and Heinck were already suspicious of them, and Berger worried that the Gestapo had already infiltrated the FBI. Dash would eventually call the FBI from a phone booth. Dash reached FBI agent Dean McCorder, who was working the nut desk. He fielded phone calls from drunks, angry citizens, and crazies. When Dash spoke with him, he gave McCorder a fake name, calling himself Frank Daniel Pastorius. Dash confessed that he was a German spy, but McCorder wrote it off as another prank call. Although McCorder made a note of the call, he filed away the memo on it, and it was quickly forgotten. It was never forwarded to the FBI in Washington. 2 days later, the second team would arrive off the coast of Florida on June 17th, where they buried 4 boxes of explosives. They were more successful than their other cohort, as they were never spotted. Dash would later travel to Washington, D.C. and call the FBI a second time. This time he spoke with FBI agent Dwayne Traynor, the head of the FBI's anti-sabotage unit. Dash introduced himself as George Davis and asked to make an appointment to speak with someone about sabotage. Dash had hoped he'd be able to speak with J. Edgar Hoover. Like McCorder, Traynor believed Dash was nuts, but he was obligated to meet with him. Reluctantly, he offered to have a meeting with him, sending agents to pick Dash up when he wasn't able to get to his office on his own. When Dash arrived, he asked Traynor if he had received a message about his first call, but Traynor had no idea what he was talking about. During their chat, Traynor remembered that his boss had told him about Cullen's story about German agents landing on Long Island. Cullen had said one of the men had a streak of gray hair, which matched the streak of gray hair in Dash's hair. Now taking Dash seriously, Traynor took him in for questioning. Dash was interrogated for 8 days, disclosing the location of the other men, including Berger, and revealing the goals of the operation. The FBI arrested the 3 remaining saboteurs in New York City on June 20th. On June 23rd, they arrested Kerling and Thiel in New York City, and then later, June 27th, they arrested Neubauer and Haupt in Chicago. From July 8th to August 4th, 1942, all 8 men were tried before a military commission of 7 United States Army officers. President Roosevelt had appointed the officers, and the trial was held at the Department of Justice building, Washington, D.C. On August 3, 1942, the generals at the tribunal reached a verdict, which was viewed by President Roosevelt. On the morning of August 8th, the prisoners learned their fate. All 8 of them had been sentenced to death by electric chair. However, Attorney General Biddle and J. Edgar Hoover appealed to President Roosevelt to spare the lives of George Dash and Peter Berger. Instead of being executed, Dash was sentenced to 30 years in prison, while Berger was sentenced to life in prison. The rest of the men, Heinrich Harm Heinck, Richard Kieran, John Kerling, Werner Thiel, Hermann Neubauer, and Herbert Hans Haupt were executed on August 8, 1942. Haupt had been the first to be executed. In June 1941, Haupt and his friend Wolfgang Vergen had set out on a road trip from Chicago to Mexico City. Haupt never imagined he would end up in Nazi Germany working as a spy. But there's no doubt about it, Haupt had always been a Nazi. As a teenager, he had joined the German-American Bund, proudly wearing a uniform with the swastika emblem and marching in goose step. Once, when Haupt was at a party, he proudly talked about Germany's superiority to the United States. This earned him a punch in the face from his best friend Larry Jordan. The two did remain friends after the incident though, so let's not get too excited and praise Larry for punching a Nazi. Haupt and Vergen had planned to find jobs in Mexico to fund their travels through South America. The plan came to an end when they realized they needed work permits. That didn't ruin their trip, however, as they continued to party in Mexico until they ran out of money. Vergen would sell his Chevy to buy them tickets back to the border, but Mexican officials wouldn't let them cross the border. The men had to pay the tax on their recently sold car if they wanted to leave. Since they didn't want to tell their parents what had happened and then ask for money, they stayed in Mexico. They returned to Mexico City, where Haupt would meet a German agent, Hans Sass. Hans Sass would take Haupt to the German embassy. Haupt was still scared to tell his parents he had failed in Mexico City. On top of that, his girlfriend Gerda, who his parents didn't approve of, was pregnant. So Haupt agreed to be sent to a monastery in Japan for a job. Haupt and Vergen were told the freighter that would take them there had to stop in California, which is where Vergen planned to get off. Unsurprisingly, the Nazis had lied to the men, and it took them directly to Japan. There was no stop in California. When they arrived, they would discover the second lie the Nazis had told. It was a labor camp, not a monastery. According to Haupt, the conditions were atrocious. Haupt and Vergen would head to Tokyo, to the German consulate asking for different jobs. They would then become sailors, but they were not allowed to leave their freighter that they were assigned to. They were Americans, enemies of Nazi Germany and Hitler. Even after Haupt had earned 2 medals for spotting a British naval blockade and warning the ship, he had not earned the trust of the Nazi government. Haupt would not be given a work permit, and he was harassed several times a week by the Gestapo. Eventually, Haupt received a letter from Papa. Hans Sass had recommended him for a job. Haupt leapt at the chance, leading him to becoming part of Operation Pistorius. 4 people had also been arrested for associating with Kerling: his friend Helmut Leiner, his girlfriend Hedwig Engemann, his estranged wife Marie Sieghard, and Marie's boyfriend Ernst Hermann Kerkholt. Although Leiner had been charged with treason since he had given Kerling change for 2 $50 bills, he was acquitted because he wasn't an American citizen. He was immediately interned though, and Leiner would plead guilty in 1943 to 3 counts of trading with the enemy. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison but later paroled in 1954. Engemann was charged with misprision of treason since they didn't have evidence that she'd exchanged money for Kerling. They could only prove she knew about Leiner exchanging money for him but didn't intervene. She pled guilty and received 3 years in prison. Although they were both members of the German-American Bund, there was no evidence to charge Sieghard or Kerkholt with anything, but they were interned for the remainder of the war. In April 1948, President Truman released Dasch and Berger, but under the condition that they would be deported to the American occupation zone in Germany. The men were never accepted, as they were considered traitors for getting their fellow countrymen killed. Dasch and Berger had been promised pardons by Hoover in exchange for their cooperation, but they never received them. Berger would pass away in 1975, and Dasch died in 1992. Now watch Last 24 Hours of Hitler's Life, or Why Hitler Never Had an Atomic Bomb.